Hi, I'm Rowena. They said I wasn't one of them, right there, during the family toast. My sister raised her glass and smirked. You're not even one of us. And everyone laughed like it was a joke they'd been rehearsing for years. But what if I told you? They weren't entirely wrong. Worse than the insult was the silence after. The way they erased me from photos, from legal documents, from memory, while smiling to my face. I grew up thinking I was the quiet one, the unremarkable one. But maybe I was just the only one who wasn't lying. They thought I wouldn't fight back, that I wouldn't open that envelope, but I did. And what I found shattered every lie they'd told, and every name they called me. So now I have one question. What would you do if your own family made you prove you belonged? I arrived in Houston under a gray sky that didn't quite match the Texas heat. The driveway was still cracked the same way I remembered, like it too had given up on being fixed. Vera greeted me at the door with a half hug, the kind people give out of habit, not affection. Her voice was bright, tight. "You made it," she said, not quite looking at me. Callista appeared behind her, her lipstick perfect, smile practiced. "We were wondering if your flight got canceled." "It didn't," I replied, stepping over the threshold. The house smelled like lemon oil and denial. This was supposed to be a celebration for Vera's birthday. Just family, she said. But even as I walked in, I knew Southern hospitality was never about honesty. It was about appearances. The house looked the same, but everything felt misaligned. Too quiet, too staged. Dinner was set in the formal dining room, long table, white linen, place cards. Callista's idea, clearly. She thrived in curated moments. She pointed toward the far end of the table. "Hope you don't mind. We ran out of spots at the main side. Just squeezed in a folding chair by the hallway. You'll still hear everything." The chair was tucked beside the bathroom door. Not quite inside the room, not quite out. I stared at it for a beat too long. "Really?" I asked gently. "We figured it'd be quieter for you," she smiled, twisting the knife with grace. I'd done jury duty in more respectful seating. I sat anyway. No one else was seated near me. I had a full view of the back of Vera's head and the floral centerpiece Callista had probably arranged herself. A few cousins offered apologetic half-smiles. Vera avoided my eyes. This wasn't about inclusion. This was placement. The same way you put furniture somewhere, it won't be in the photo. When I reached for my wine glass, I noticed the place card. Mona R. I blinked. My name is Rowena. It always has been. "Mona?" I said out loud, raising the card between two fingers. "Oh," Vera said, sipping from her glass. "That's what came to mind. You never really liked your name, did you?" "I never liked it mispronounced," I said calmly. Callista laughed, tossing her hair. "You've always had such alternative energy, Mona." "That's funny," I replied, voice dry. "I thought I had DNA like the rest of you." No one responded. I set the card down and cut into the salad in front of me. The name wasn't just wrong, it was symbolic. A reminder that even my identity was something they reshaped when it didn't fit their version of the family puzzle. Callista was in her element, holding court. She spoke of legacy and our roots, words that floated like polished stones across the table, skipping over me without pause. When I tried to add something, just a memory about Vera's lemon bars from high school, Callista cut in before I finished. "That's sweet," she said. Anyway, as I was saying, a neighbor leaned toward me at one point and asked, "Are you Vera's assistant or her lawyer?" I smiled. "Something like that." Callista didn't correct her. "Of course not. I remembered something a professor once told us in law school. The people who erase you don't do it loudly. They do it with charm. And if they're good, they make you think it was your fault for vanishing." By dessert, the tension had become texture. Vera tapped her glass for silence. I just want to say thank you all for being here. It means so much, especially to see how strong our families become. My daughters, she paused to look at Callista, have carried our name with grace. It's good to see the bloodline continue strong. My grip on the wine stem didn't falter. I raised my glass like everyone else, but I didn't drink. I couldn't. Because in that moment, it hit me. They weren't just pretending I didn't matter. They were pretending I was never part of this. And they were doing it beautifully. I leaned back slightly, unzipped the side of my purse under the table. My fingers brushed a familiar envelope, thick, sealed, labeled in black Sharpie, confidential, DNA results. They thought this was a dinner, but it was starting to feel like a trial. The caterers arrived just before sunset, all crisp white shirts and 2 wide smiles. Vera stood in the kitchen, praising Callista for pulling everything together. Everything looks amazing, sweetheart, she said, running her fingers along the silver-plated serving tray like it was an heirloom. Callista, always poised for an audience, turned to the staff and clapped twice. All right, let's get the lamb plated and the wine refreshed. People are hungry, and Mom deserves a dinner worth remembering. I hovered by the fridge, trying to find a pocket of air that didn't feel owned. I brought the lemon pie, I offered, unwrapping the foil on a carefully browned crust I'd made that morning. The one you liked growing up, Vera. Thought we could— Oh, we've got plenty, Vera cut in with a dismissive wave. No need to overdo it. I stared at her for a beat. It's homemade, she nodded, already turning away. So are the rolls? Callista had them brought in from that artisan bakery off Shepherd. You know the one. Callista chimed in, not missing a beat. Your effort's sweet though, Ro. Really, domestic isn't usually your lane, huh? A few guests chuckled, not loudly, just enough to sting. I forced a smile that felt like holding breath under boiling water. Later, as the main course settled and the staff cleared plates with silent efficiency, Callista stood from her chair, clinking her glass with a butter knife. Let's get everyone by the fireplace. We'll do a group shot for Mom's memory wall. I should have known what was coming next. Vera turned to me, smiling sweetly. Rowena, would you mind taking the photo? You've always had an eye for symmetry. I blinked. That seat by the bathroom, the misspelled name, the rejection of the pie, it had all been rehearsal for this. You want me to take the picture? Callista raised her eyebrows like I was being difficult. You're always so good at framing people. One of your gifts. They were already arranging themselves in neat rows in front of the fireplace. I stood there for a second, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and surrender, before lifting the phone and aiming it toward them. Smile, I said flatly. You'll want to remember this. The shutter clicked. I looked at the screen. There they were, Callista in the center, Vera glowing beside her, a cascade of perfectly coiffed relatives leaning in, and not a space left where I would have fit. I stepped away, letting the next cousin take the phone for a few selfies. My throat felt dry, but I wasn't thirsty. I wandered out to the back patio, glass of wine in hand, and found a quiet chair beneath the string lights Callista had demanded last minute. The breeze was mild, but something about it made me feel like I was unraveling. Not frantically, just slowly enough to know it couldn't be stopped. I thought about the first time I made lemon pie. I was 8. Vera stood beside me in the kitchen, her voice gentler then. She let me crack the eggs. I wore one of Callista's aprons, oversized and ridiculous, and Vera said it made me look ready to be a real woman. Now I couldn't even get the crust acknowledged. I remembered a quote from Toni Morrison. If you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down. For the first time, I wondered if my definition of family was the heaviest thing I'd ever tried to carry. Inside, through the glass, I saw Callista lift her phone and take a selfie with Vera. I watched as she typed a caption, then smiled at the screen. Moments later, it popped up on social. 3 generations of legacy, blessed beyond measure. 3. Not 4. Not with me. Not anymore. The door behind me creaked open. A couple walked out, friends of Callista's maybe. The woman leaned in toward her partner and whispered, not softly enough. I thought she was just a friend of the family, from out of town. They walked past without noticing I'd heard. Vera had been standing nearby. She didn't flinch, didn't correct them, didn't say a word, and that's when it clicked. If they were going to treat me like a stranger, then maybe it was time I started acting like one. Not a lost daughter, not a guest waiting to be re-invited. A stranger, with evidence. The next morning, the kitchen hummed with ordinary noise. Blender whirring, utensils clinking, the gentle tick of the wall clock. Sunlight streamed through the window, golden and undeserved. Callista was already dressed in a sleeveless blouse, blending her morning smoothie with one hand while scrolling her phone with the other. Vera sat at the end of the counter, reading Facebook comments like they were gospel. No one said a word about the toast, about the photo, about me. They just moved on, like the whole night hadn't turned me into an outsider with a front row seat. The silence wasn't a pause. It was strategy, because silence lets them pretend there's nothing to fix. I offered to help Vera organize the old photo albums for her birthday memory board. It was a safe excuse to dig. She led me to the garage, where cardboard boxes lined the shelving like a second archive. Be careful with those, she muttered. Some of them are from when we moved in. I opened a worn box labeled Rowena School Years and started flipping through manila folders, yellowing certificates, crayon drawings, birthday cards written in block letters. And then I saw it. A small envelope tucked between 2 report cards. My handwriting scrawled across the front. To Mom, private. It stopped me cold. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a pediatrician's letter dated October 1995. I would have been 10. The letter flagged a blood type inconsistency, something about results not aligning with Vera's medical profile. The doctor recommended follow-up. There was a signature, a stamp, a note at the bottom. Discussed with guardian. No further action at this time. Guardian, not mother. A rush of heat climbed my spine. I remembered that doctor visit. Vaguely, they drew blood. Vera wouldn't let me ask questions. Said it was routine. Then we went to get ice cream and never spoke of it again. She knew. Since I was 10, long before I had words to shape suspicion, I folded the letter back with surgical precision. I didn't cry, not anymore. I just filed it away in my mind's growing archive of betrayals. A few hours later, I wandered into the den where the family's framed photo wall lived like a curated museum. Every decade had its row. 1970s, Vera and Alton in bell-bottoms. 1980s, Callista in pigtails with missing teeth. Then the 2000s. One frame, labeled 2004, was empty. I stared at it longer than I should have. That year, I'd won the statewide Academic Achievement Award. I remembered Vera making me wear a dress I hated for the photo. Alton had smiled so wide his glasses fogged. That picture existed. I knew it did. Wasn't there a photo here? I asked Vera later, casually. She glanced at the wall, then shrugged. I think that frame broke. Callista replaced it. Probably forgot to print a new one. Of course. I nodded like that answer made sense. But something about her voice felt off, like a script rehearsed too many times. The omission wasn't careless, it was calculated. That night, while the others gathered for coffee in the living room, I retreated to the sunroom. My laptop glowed like a confession booth as I opened a blank document and typed a title, Family Redactions. Below it, I began listing each moment, the place card, the chair, the toast, the erased picture, the sealed letter. At the top of the page, I typed a quote, "Memory is not what happened. It's what you're allowed to keep." And I wasn't going to let them decide what stayed anymore. From my purse, I pulled a photograph. It was a print I'd scanned and kept years ago, just in case. A picture of Vera, Alton, and me. My arm looped around their waists, my smile real. I waited until the house dimmed and the sound of dishwashers and casual chatter died out. Quiet footsteps carried me into the den. I opened the frame labeled 2004 and slid the photo back inside. I didn't change the label. I didn't center it. I wanted it slightly tilted, enough to make them look. The next morning, I woke to Callista's voice cutting through the floorboards. "Who put this picture back up?" The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, half expecting things to be quiet, awkward maybe, but ordinary. Instead, I was met with Callista's voice, clipped and sharp. "Who put this picture back up?" She was holding the photo I had slipped into the empty frame the night before. Her fingers gripped the edge like it might cut her. Vera stood beside her, hands folded around a coffee mug, lips tight, eyes on the floor. I didn't hesitate. I did. It's part of our family history, isn't it? The room fell into one of those thick, pressurized silences that makes your ears ring. The coffee machine hissed behind us, spitting steam like punctuation. No one answered. Not Vera, not Callista, not even Lilith, who had just walked in with a phone in one hand and a half-eaten banana in the other. She didn't even notice the tension, or pretended not to. She placed her phone down on the counter, the screen lighting up briefly. I wasn't trying to snoop. I swear I wasn't. But the notification caught my eye. Group message. Family toast planning. No Rowena. My heart stuttered, just once. The phone chimed again. Another message slid across the screen. Let's keep it smooth. Say something polite but firm. It's time she knows she's not part of this. I blinked. Then came the next line. She's always been the shadow. Time to let her drift. I picked up the phone, scrolled. Vera's name was in the chat. I didn't feel the phone fall from my hand. I only heard it land on the counter with a soft thud. Lilith turned. "Oh, sorry. I should have put it on silent." I handed it back to her, careful not to let my fingers shake. It wasn't just them doing this. It was everyone I'd grown up believing saw me as a sister, a daughter, a cousin. They weren't ignoring me by accident. They were excluding me on purpose, and they planned it. Later that afternoon, while I was pouring myself a glass of water, one of the younger kids, Callista's nephew, I think, wandered up to me with the kind of innocence only kids are brave enough to weaponize. "Are you adopted?" he asked, curious more than cruel. "Mom said you came from somewhere else." I crouched to meet his eyes. "Why do you ask that?" He shrugged. "She said you don't look like anyone." Vera was nearby, flipping through a magazine. She heard every word. She didn't correct him. She didn't even flinch. She just turned a page. I looked back at the boy and smiled. Sometimes families are more complicated than people tell you, but I've been here the whole time. He nodded like I'd told him the sky was blue. Then he ran off. I stood slowly, setting the glass on the counter before it slipped from my fingers. Kids don't make up stories like that. They repeat what they hear behind closed doors. And when the grown-ups stop using your name, the children do too. By dinner, I had made my decision. I didn't wait to be asked. I sat at the main table, right beside Vera. Her glance barely masked surprise, but she didn't say a word. When Callista raised her glass to toast the strength of tight family bonds, I looked straight ahead and said, calm as prayer. Seems like some of us are wrapped tighter than others. A beat of stunned quiet followed. Lilith looked down at her plate. Callista set her glass down with a click that echoed louder than necessary. I didn't flinch. No one challenged me, but the shift in the room was tangible. After dinner, I slipped away before dessert could become another stage. Vera followed me into the hallway, her heels soft on the carpet. "Rowena," she said, gentle but cold. "You've always been sensitive, and I just don't think this is the environment for you anymore." I turned, looked her in the eye. "Maybe it's not the environment," I said. "Maybe it's the architects." She blinked. I pulled my purse closer, unzipping it with practiced ease. My fingers brushed the familiar envelope, but something felt off. I looked down. The seal was broken. By mid-morning, the house had settled into its usual performance of civility. The clinking of plates, the soft rustle of magazines. It all hummed beneath the surface like a well-rehearsed lie. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard them planning lunch, Callista and Vera standing side by side like generals coordinating a campaign. "It's just the ladies," Callista was saying. "That little cafe with the patio. Good light, Mom. You'll love it." Vera smiled. "Perfect. Just us girls." I was 2 feet away, yet completely invisible. "What time?" I asked, voice level. They both turned, almost surprised I could speak. "Oh," Vera hesitated, fingers tightening around her mug. "It's just close family this time." "Right," I said. "Of course." I stirred my tea slowly, watching the leaves swirl like they had somewhere better to be. Apparently, blood wasn't thick enough to make room at a table. That night, the house was dim, quiet, except for a low hum of the dishwasher. I passed the study and heard Vera and Callista behind the half-closed door. I wouldn't have stopped if I hadn't heard my name. "She's not in it," Callista said, her voice calm, surgical. "It makes sense. We don't want confusion later." "She'll understand," Vera replied. "It's not about love, it's about legality." I moved closer, barely breathing. The rustle of paper, the sound of Vera's pen scratching. I leaned just enough to see the document in Vera's hands. The will. My name wasn't on it, not crossed out, just absent, like I'd never existed. I pulled out my phone, angled the camera through the crack, and snapped a photo. Then I stepped back, heart pounding, but my face blank. "I know a thing or two about legality," I whispered to myself. "Let's see how they do with evidence." Dinner the next evening felt like theater. People chatted about grandkids and stock portfolios. The roast was dry, and the air was tenser than the meat. Vera brought up needing help with medical paperwork and appointments. Callista, always the heroine, chimed in. "Don't worry, Mom," she said. "I'll take care of it. Let real daughters manage real decisions." The fork in my hand stilled mid-air. The room froze. A few relatives looked down. Others sipped their drinks too fast. I set my fork down gently, turned toward her, and said, "Good, because a real daughter would know how to read a power of attorney." Callista's smile faltered for the first time all weekend. Vera didn't speak, but her mouth thinned into a hard line. Later that night, I walked into the den and grabbed one of the old home videos. I popped it into the player and hit play without a word. My 12th birthday flashed onto the screen. There I was, blowing out candles, Vera beside me, laughing like she meant it. Alton's voice off camera, telling me to make a wish. The room grew silent as the tape played. Even Callista looked uncomfortable. I paused the video on a frame where Vera had her hand on my shoulder, both of us grinning. I was here, I said to no one in particular. I've always been here. Stop acting like I'm a footnote. Then I walked out, leaving the screen frozen behind me. That night, I was brushing my hair in my room when Vera knocked softly and stepped in. "You're starting to make people uncomfortable," she said, voice low. I met her eyes in the mirror. "Uncomfortable is how erasure starts," I said. "Unacceptable is how it ends." I turned toward my suitcase, unzipped the top compartment, and revealed the folders I'd been collecting, labeled clearly in black ink. Medical records, deed, power of attorney, DNA evidence. This wasn't a threat. It was the outline of a storm. The morning moved slow, like the air was thick with something unspoken. The kind of quiet that made the clinking of a spoon sound like a scream. I sat at the breakfast table, pushing eggs around my plate, while Callista scrolled her phone, lips pursed in satisfaction. Vera sat opposite me, flipping through a Southern Living magazine without really reading. They weren't avoiding me, they were waiting, watching. That's when it hit me. When they get quiet, it's not because they've surrendered, it's because they've armed themselves differently. I cleared my plate, placed it in the sink, and excused myself. No one looked up. Later, when Vera stepped out to water the hydrangeas she never actually cared for, I wandered into the den. The landline still sat in its cradle by the bookshelf, blinking red. Voicemail. The house line was a leftover relic from another time, but it still served its purpose. I pressed play, expecting a reminder call from Vera's dentist or a church announcement. Instead, Callista's voice came through, low and calculated. "She doesn't know, right? I mean, she can't. The test. No way she kept a copy." A pause. Then a man's voice, probably her lawyer. "As long as the old woman doesn't slip, you're fine. Just stay composed." The room tilted. They knew about the DNA test, and they were trying to spin it, control it, bury it. I stared at the machine for a full beat before pressing the record button on my phone. I captured every word, heart pounding not from fear, but clarity. I'd been underestimated. Again. When I got back to my room, I reached into my suitcase and pulled out the envelope, the one labeled confidential, DNA results. I held it for a moment, the weight of truth heavy in my palm, but the flap was loose. I opened it. The papers were still there, but the seal had been broken. Someone had opened it and then carefully resealed it, like I wouldn't notice. My fingers flipped through the pages until I realized one was missing. The notarized affidavit from the clinic. Gone. I froze. Then I steadied myself, checked my cloud backup. Every document had been scanned and stored with timestamps, password protected, multi-authenticated. They took the paper, but they didn't take the proof. I whispered. They read it. They know. And they still smiled at me over eggs. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I got in my car and drove. At FedEx, I printed 3 sets of every document, sent one to my law firm via overnight certified mail, kept one for myself, stored a digital copy on a USB drive small enough to fit under a necklace charm I wore against my collarbone. You only need to be underestimated once to realize how dangerous silence really is. By the time I returned, it was near sunset. Vera and Callista were on the back porch sipping white wine, laughing at something I wasn't supposed to hear. Dinner was light. Chicken salad, rolls, too many forks for a meal that didn't require them. Then Callista stood. "We've been thinking," she said, laying her napkin across her lap like she was hosting a TED Talk. "It's probably time to have a real conversation, a family circle." Vera nodded in agreement. Yes, we think it's time to clear the air. No tension, just clarity. I smiled. Broad, calm, the way you smile at someone who thinks they've just stepped on your neck without realizing your hands are on the lever that controls the floor beneath them. I was thinking the same thing, I said. I excused myself from the table and walked to my room, closed the door with a gentle click, sat on the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. A folder titled "In Case of Denial" glowed on the desktop. Inside, documents, voice memos, screenshots, photos, recordings. I moved the folder to an encrypted drive and whispered, "Let's see how much air they really want cleared." The text came through at 9:14 a.m. as I was refilling my coffee. Tonight, 7 p.m., living room, family conversation only. Callista. The group chat had gone silent for 2 days. Now, suddenly, it lit up with false warmth. Heart emojis, thumbs up. One of the cousins responded, "Finally." I stared at it for a long time before locking my phone and setting it face down. So this was it. The carefully staged circle. Not a conversation, not reconciliation, just another performance. Around noon, Vera pulled me aside. "This isn't an attack," she said. "It's just time to settle lingering misunderstandings." Her voice was soft, measured, the kind of tone people use when they're about to light a fire and blame you for the smoke. By 6:50 p.m., the living room had been rearranged, chairs in a half circle. Vera sat in the middle like a matriarch about to issue verdicts. Callista stood, holding a glass of wine like it was a microphone. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "I know the last few days have been tense, but we are family. And family is about shared values, shared DNA." She turned to me with that same pageant-winning smile. "Some of us, well, almost all of us, are here because we belong, genetically and spiritually." Vera didn't flinch, neither did the others. They had invited cousins from out of town, people I hadn't seen since childhood, and they were all here to witness this ceremony of exclusion, a collective rebranding. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from clarity. This was never about misunderstanding. This was a soft exile. When Callista finished her monologue, I waited, let the silence settle like dust. Then I spoke. "I see. So we're drawing lines tonight." Callista blinked. Vera looked toward the window. "I've always respected boundaries," I continued, "but I didn't know you were going to build a wall and hand me a shovel." Some heads turned. A few avoided my eyes. Vera exhaled. "Rowena, don't make this harder than it has to be. You know your place." There it was. The words didn't knock the wind out of me. They confirmed what I'd already known. I stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a photo in a worn frame. Me, barely a year old, sitting in Vera's lap. Both of us smiling. No one else in the picture. "My place," I said, holding the frame up, "was here, from the beginning. You just rewrote the map." I walked to the center of the circle and placed the photo on the floor. You can't erase someone who remembers everything. Then I sat back down. I didn't ask for validation. I didn't need it. Callista's lips tightened. Vera looked away. The circle was no longer a trap. It was a mirror, and they didn't like what they saw. After everyone dispersed, murmuring about dessert and air conditioning, I lingered by the hallway. The kitchen lights were on. I heard Callista's voice, sharp and low. "She wants a war?" she hissed. "Let's give her one." "This house isn't hers to haunt." Vera didn't answer. I stepped back into the shadows, calm as ever. Back in my room, I opened my phone and pulled up the secure file I'd backed up weeks ago. House title: Owner Rowena Marsden. I stared at it, the legal header clear and irrefutable. Let them try, I whispered. They called it a resolution dinner. Vera said it was a chance to clear the air before I left. But the moment I walked into the dining room and saw the guest list, I knew exactly what it was. A spectacle. Two of Vera's cousins, who hadn't spoken to me since I was 15, were seated near the head of the table. A neighbor, someone from Vera's church, and an old friend of Alton's who had once called me the quiet one, were also there. This wasn't a dinner. This was an audience. They wanted a show. Good. I had one. Callista stood before the first course was served. She clinked her wine glass with the back of a spoon, letting the room still before she began. To family, she said smoothly, and to those who've carried our blood through the generations. Her eyes slid toward me, a small, practiced pause. To the ones who always knew they didn't quite belong. A few people chuckled. The kind of laughter that wraps itself in politeness, but leaves bruises. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for me to fumble, to get up, to cry. Instead, I stood slowly and reached into my purse. My fingers touched the edge of the manila folder. I laid it carefully next to Vera's plate. Actually, I said, I brought something too. Callista's smile faltered. I opened the folder. This is a notarized DNA report. It has my name, Vera's name, and my father's. The results confirm paternity, but not maternity. The room went still. Not quiet, still, as if time took one long inhale and forgot how to exhale. I let them sit with it for a second. Then I added, turns out, I'm the only one here who didn't lie about where I came from. Vera's hand trembled as she reached for her wine. A cousin dropped his fork. Callista's shoulders tensed like she was preparing to pounce, but her mouth didn't know what to say. I continued, voice clear. My biological mother died during childbirth. Vera took me in. She raised me, but she never told me. Not once. And instead of preparing me for the truth, she rewrote me, like I was a page in a book she didn't like the ending to. I turned toward Vera. You didn't just raise me, you rebranded me. No one spoke. Even the air felt heavy, unsure where to go. Then I reached into the folder once more and pulled out the pen. It was the same one I had used to sign the release forms at the clinic. Still faintly stained with blood from the test prick. I held it up. You said I didn't belong, I said softly. But I bled for the truth, and now you get to sit with it. I placed the pen in the center of the table, right between the mashed potatoes and Callista's untouched salad. No one moved. Then I turned and walked toward the hallway. Vera stood up suddenly. Rowena, her voice cracked. I didn't think you'd actually... I didn't turn back. You didn't think I'd survive this. That's your real mistake. I opened the front door. Thunder cracked somewhere in the distance, the night outside breaking open with the scent of summer rain. I stepped onto the porch, the silence behind me collapsing like a theater curtain. A voice called out from the dining room. A family friend I barely remembered. What happens now? I paused at the edge of the steps. My voice came out low, certain. Now I choose who gets to call me family. The next morning felt like someone had unplugged the house. No doors creaked, no chairs scraped, no one asked if I wanted coffee. I lay in bed longer than usual, listening to the stillness pressing against the walls. I hadn't just shifted the power dynamic last night. I'd dismantled the illusion completely. When I stepped into the kitchen, Callista was gone. Vera was sitting on the patio staring into her untouched tea. She didn't look up. I didn't say a word. Sometimes the loudest screams are the ones nobody answers. By mid-afternoon, I remembered the documents Callista had once bragged about updating. The estate files. I retrieved the folder from Vera's office, tucked beneath stacks of unused stationery. Inside, the familiar printed will sat on top. There it was, my name, not removed, redacted, black lines through it like a classified file. A new clause added in neat serif font. Inheritance limited to verified next of kin. They had edited me out legally the same way they tried to erase me emotionally. I smirked as I snapped a photo and sent it to my lawyer with a one-line subject. Guess who forgot the house title? Callista was clever. She just wasn't smarter than me. Later that afternoon, the living room turned into a viewing space. A projector lit up the far wall as guests gathered for what Callista billed as a trip down memory lane. I sat near the back, arms crossed. The highlight reel flickered. Birthdays, graduations, beach vacations. My name was never said. My face, when it did appear, was flashed across the screen so quickly, it looked like a mistake. A ghost passing through someone else's life. Behind me, someone whispered, "Maybe she wasn't around much back then." I stood up before the final slide rolled. I didn't need to see more evidence of my own erasure. I'd lived it. I stepped outside, grateful for the sting of fresh air. The yard was too quiet, the oak tree too still. Then I heard footsteps. Alton. He moved slow these days, careful with each step. We stood in silence for a beat before he said, "I didn't erase you. I was just too tired to fight." I looked at him, really looked. "You knew," I said. His nod was heavy with age, regret, and something like shame. "Your mother loved you in her way," he said, "but she feared what you reminded her of." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. It was the closest thing to honesty I'd gotten from anyone in that house. That night, I scrolled through Facebook while packing the last of my things. A post caught my eye. A cousin had shared photos from the resolution dinner, as they called it. One group shot, everyone gathered around the long table. The caption read, "Everyone who matters." I stared at the photo. I had been standing off to the side. In real life, I was there. But in the crop, in the final version, I was gone. When they erase you publicly, you respond publicly. I opened my laptop, typed quickly. Actually, I was there, and I brought receipts. Attached were the photos of the will, the title, the DNA confirmation, a still from the video where I held up the pen, the one with my blood on it. I hit post. The comments started within minutes. By sunrise, my post had over 3,000 shares. It started slow. An old classmate from high school commenting, "I remember you always sitting in the back, never speaking unless you had something worth saying." Then came a former coworker. She once helped me through a custody case without asking for credit. Then a neighbor. I always wondered why she wasn't in those family holiday cards. By noon, distant cousins I hadn't seen since I was a teenager were messaging me privately. Some apologized. Most didn't mention the post directly. They sent awkward lines like, "Just wanted to say I hope you're doing okay." Callista responded with a status update of her own. Some people live for drama. I live for peace. Translation: I got caught, but let me gaslight you into thinking I'm still the composed one. Except this time, people didn't buy it. The likes were down. Comments polite but sparse. One relative asked, "Is this about Rowena?" under her post. She didn't reply. The next day, I stopped at the local grocery store on my way to pick up more printer ink. In the produce aisle, a woman tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me," she said with a smile. "Weren't you at that dinner party last week? The one at Vera's? I thought you were one of the caterers." I smiled, warm and deliberate. "Actually, I was the only reason that house is still in the family." Her eyes widened. "Oh, I didn't mean—" "I know," I said, handing her my business card. "Sometimes it's not malice. It's the story people are told. and I'm just rewriting the ending." She stood frozen as I walked away. That evening, I returned to Vera's house for the last time. I told them I was coming to grab the rest of my things. Quiet, quick, no need for fanfare. Inside my old room, I noticed it immediately. My travel folder had been moved, opened. A sheet was missing. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app connected to the smart camera I'd installed facing the hallway. 36 hours earlier, time-stamped at 11:43 p.m., Callista was in my room. She rifled through my folder and tucked something into her purse. I didn't flinch. I just forwarded the clip to my attorney with a short caption, "Evidence tampering, attached." She played the image. I built the truth. As I was walking back to my car, Vera came out onto the driveway. "Rowena," she said. Her voice was sharp, but her eyes looked damp. "You're turning this into a war." I turned, deadpan. "No, you started it the moment you let them rewrite me. I raised you. You hid me." I cut in, calm. "You let them decide who I was. Now I'm the one deciding what happens next." She started to cry. I didn't move, not toward her, not away, just stood there long enough for the air between us to stretch thin. Pity never repaired what silence broke. Later that night, back at the rental, I was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. No knock, no text, just one chime. I opened the door. There was no one there, but on the welcome mat sat a plain envelope. No name, just the word "sorry" written in shaky print. Inside was the missing document, the notarized affidavit from the DNA clinic, and a short note. I took it. I panicked. "But you were right. L." I sat down slowly. Lilith. The morning after Lilith's letter was the first one I'd had in years where no one expected me to explain myself. No footsteps in the hallway. No veiled comments over toast. No empty performances of normalcy. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was clean. I made myself a slow cup of coffee and turned on the radio. Sinatra's "That's Life" played faintly in the background, and for once it didn't feel ironic. I let it play all the way through. Peace, I realized, wasn't the absence of noise. It was finally having room for your own. Vera hadn't reached out. Not a call, not a message. Callista was radio silent. I didn't bother checking her social media. I knew her too well. She was busy building a new version of the truth to post. I spent the afternoon driving back to the house one final time. I told no one. The key still worked. No alarms. I only wanted two things: my coat and a leather-bound notebook I'd left in a drawer by the sunroom. The rest, they could keep. Let them cling to the curated museum of family they'd built. I didn't need props. As I passed through the kitchen on my way out, I stopped at the window. The garden was still there, neglected but not gone. A few rosemary stalks still reached for the sun, stubborn and fragrant. I knelt, clipped a sprig, and slid it into my wallet between two old receipts, one from a coffee shop in Portland, the other from the hardware store when I'd first bought the mailbox plaque that read Marsden. This house had taught me a lot about what to grow and more about what needed pruning. That evening, I sat in my rented apartment with a legal pad and pen. But instead of notes or strategy, I wrote a letter to Vera. I didn't plan to send it. I wrote slow, careful. You didn't have to love me like your own. You just had to not make me question whether I ever belonged. I didn't need your perfection. I needed your honesty. And when you chose silence, you made me rewrite myself. I folded the letter once, placed it in the drawer beside my passport. Maybe one day I'd burn it. Maybe not. Closure, I've learned, isn't always a two-person task. The next day, I missed a call from an unknown number. A voicemail followed. It was Damien. "I saw what you posted," he said. His voice was softer than I remembered. "Just wanted you to know, I always knew you were the real one. I played it twice, didn't call back, but I saved it. It was the first time someone saw me and didn't need to watch me bleed to believe I existed. 2 days later, I packed a single suitcase. Not to escape. This time, it was a choice. I wasn't running. I was leaving. I folded the framed DNA report in tissue and placed it in the drawer with the letter. I didn't need it anymore. The truth wasn't a weapon. It was the floor I now stood on. Before zipping up the suitcase, I paused at the mirror. No mascara, no jewelry, no armor. I was done performing. Belonging isn't about what you're born into. It's about what you refuse to keep shrinking for. A knock interrupted the stillness, not frantic, not soft. I opened the door. He stood there, unexpected, familiar, not someone I thought would be the one to show up. I didn't say a word, but my lips curled, just slightly. The envelope came on a Thursday, slid under the door of my rental apartment like a final signature. Inside was the official deed confirmation. Clean, stamped, legal. My name, my address, my house, not theirs anymore. I didn't call. I didn't text. I drove over alone. When I pulled up, Callista's SUV was in the driveway. Vera's wasn't. I took that as grace. I didn't knock. The door was unlocked, as if they still believed they had dominion over that house. I stepped inside. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and fear. Callista emerged from the kitchen, holding a half-filled wine glass. She didn't look surprised, only mildly annoyed, like I'd interrupted her at a spa. "Did you forget something?" she asked, gesturing toward the staircase. "No," I replied, and pulled a folder from my bag. I handed it to her. She flipped through the pages slowly. Title documents, notarized confirmations, city clerk filings. Her face shifted, but only slightly. I spoke plainly. "You told the world I didn't belong. Now, legally, you don't." On top of the folder was a certified eviction notice. 30 days. Callista set the wine down with the kind of grace only someone cornered could muster. "This house was never about papers, Rowena." "No," I said, voice low. "It was about silence and control. But if it wasn't about papers, why did you try so hard to steal mine?" The corner of her lip twitched, barely. "You think this little stunt will make people love you?" she said, stepping closer. "I'll take this public. I'll tell them you bullied an old woman. You embarrassed your own mother in front of guests." "You already did that," I said, smiling. "Except this time, I brought the receipts. My truth outranked your story." She slammed the door behind me as I walked out, but I didn't flinch. I didn't need to look back. The next morning, I made my final post. It wasn't rage-filled. It wasn't even emotional. It was clear. I included screenshots of the eviction notice, the DNA confirmation, a brief video clip from the family circle. My caption read, "I was erased. I didn't scream. I documented." By nightfall, the post had gone viral. Articles surfaced. "When DNA shatters family myths." Comment sections filled with words like brave, underrated, and vindicated. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Days later, a package arrived at my new address. No return label. Inside were 3 things: a stack of childhood photos, all of me, smiling in crooked pigtails, a pressed daisy I once gave Vera in 2nd grade, and the original birth certificate, signed by Vera, her name in blue ink, no note. I stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, I fed it into the fire pit on the balcony of my apartment. It curled and blackened until it was just ash. "She created the lie," I whispered. "I won't let it define the ending." The next week, I finalized the sale. The house sold in under 6 days, cash offer. I kept only 2 things, a clipping of rosemary from the yard and 1 photo, me at age 7, standing alone under the oak tree. I was smiling in that one, not for anyone, just myself. On the morning I left, I rolled my suitcase down the porch steps and looked back one last time. The front door, the chipped bricks, the window I used to sneak out of in high school. It all looked smaller now. I flew to Seattle. It rained the evening I arrived. Not a downpour, but that gentle drizzle the Pacific Northwest knows best. I stepped into my new home, dropped my bag near the door, and opened the window wide. Then I walked out onto the porch and placed the rosemary in a clay pot by the steps. The air smelled like eucalyptus and beginnings. This wasn't about winning. This was about surviving long enough to define what survival meant. And just like that, I stopped waiting for them to open the door. I built one myself and walked through.